Hello, fellow fight fans, and welcome to the Untitled Fightcast number 009. This week we're going to talk about two things. The first one being corners in combat sports. And this is obviously pertaining to the Deontay Wilder fight. He lost his most recent fight against Tyson Fury by way of his corner throwing in the towel, and it's been reported that he fired the corner man that did it. The second thing we're going to talk about is what the job of a referee is, because this past weekend, Kevin McDonald absolutely botched what could have been and should have been and most likely would have been fight of the night. So wrap up, lock in, and let's get it started. So, very quickly, I want to go over what happened in the Wilder fight 2 weekends ago, back on the 22nd of February. Fury absolutely outclassed Wilder in terms of actual boxing skill.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was an ass kicking.
But not only that, but instead of just ducking and dodging and trying to basically jab his way to victory with points, Tyson Fury walked down Wilder and came in with the big power punches after weighing in at 273 pounds. Many people, professionals, spectators, everyone said that the fight could have been stopped in rounds 5 or 6.
Man, they should have threw it in a little earlier.
I think he could have been pulled out the round before. If you seen him on the stool, he was like a defeated man anyway.
I thought they should have stopped it earlier.
I hate to say it again. He was done in the fifth round, fellas. He's done. I'm sorry. Starch is out of his body. Starch is gone.
But the fight ended up getting stopped in the 7th round when the second corner man, Mark Breland, threw in the towel. Now, the biggest reason some people are arguing against this is that Deontay carries his just epic power in his right hand all the way through to the end of any fight. As you can see in the first fight when he knocked down and basically knocked out Fury in the 12th round. And a lot of people think that he could have put Fury away at any point, but I would argue against this. The biggest reason I would make that argument is because Deontay didn't have his feet under him due to his equilibrium being messed up from a shot he took in the 3rd round. Without being able to sit down on his punches, there was almost basically no way that he was ever going to find or use that power shot. After the fight, Deontay reportedly asked in the locker room who threw in the towel, and that's when Mark answered, and he apparently was fired on the spot. This is an absolute shame because Mark is more or less a hero, and I'm not the only one who thinks this.
Mark Breland, you know what? This is a powerful word, but he's a hero.
And so, let's talk about the job of the corner in any combat sport. The corner has many jobs before, during, and after the fight. Before the fight, the corner has to get their fighter prepared in whatever way they've decided is best for them. And just starting with that, Deontay's corner failed him because he walked out in his very elaborate suit that apparently weighed 40 pounds that he was wearing for 15-20 minutes before the fight, before the walkout, and then had to walk out in it, walk up the steps, had it on in the ring, and Deontay cited this as being a big reason why his legs weren't under him. And whether or not that's true, it just doesn't seem like the best idea, and someone in the corner absolutely should have said, hey, look, this thing looks great, and the showmanship and presentation is all wonderful, but if you want to win this fight, this probably isn't the best idea. Now, during the fight, the corner is going to be yelling instructions at their fighter during the rounds, and between the rounds, the corner has to tend to swelling and cuts and then giving advice, again, in whatever way the corner and the fighter see fit based on the relationship and communication that they have established. But before all of this, the number one most important job of the corner is to protect their fighter, to the point that Chael Sonnen has even said that any TKO that a ref has called in any fight have all been examples of when the corner should have stopped the fight themselves. That point can be up for debate if you want. I never thought of it that way, and maybe not all of them are like that, but after sitting on that thought for a little bit after hearing it, I think there's quite a number of times that TKOs that were called, let's say even just half of them, absolutely should have been called by the corner. With that being said, there are also plenty of examples when the corner should have definitely thrown in the towel when the fight also wasn't stopped by the ref. The most recent of which was Karolina Kowalkiewicz's fight against Yan Xiaonan. I'm probably mispronouncing that, and I'm very sorry. I'm doing my best. And this fight actually happened on the very same night as the Wilder Fury fight, earlier in the evening. During the first round, I believe it was the first minute, it might have been the first 2 minutes, but in the first half of the first round, Yan Xiaonan landed a beautiful left that broke Karolina's orbital bone. She then spent the rest of the fight covering up her face, couldn't see because she was seeing double out of her eye, and also couldn't see past her hand because it was covering her face. Now, she has the heart of a warrior, and she's a great fighter, but she had no chance of winning that fight because of that injury. That's the kind of injury that if she had gone into the fight with that injury, she, shouldn't even have gone into the fight with that injury. And so, especially with it happening in the first half of the first round, she basically spent 3 rounds, 2.5 after that, just getting beat up and taking damage that she didn't need to take. And that's going to cause her post-fight recovery to be so much longer. She already needs surgery on her orbital bone, and she would have needed that even without the extra damage she took. Her corner absolutely 100% failed her in the very, very worst way that night. And I couldn't help but feel sad and honestly quite angry the entire time I was watching this fight. After the fight, in a video on Instagram, she said,
"Hi guys, thank you for your support. First time in my life after fight I cannot say I'm okay."
And that's not her fault. That's her corner's fault. And to be honest, I'm just so unbelievably furious. And I mean, honestly, you want to talk about someone in the corner being fired. Karolina needs new corner people because it is an absolute disgrace what they put her through, because fighters very rarely, it happens once out of every million fights, that a fighter will retire themselves from the fight, where they'll wave it off or say I'm done. But basically a fighter's going to fight until they can't anymore. And even though she really couldn't fight effectively, the fact that she was conscious was enough for her to keep fighting. And the corner's job, responsibility, before any of the other things I mentioned, is to protect the fighter, not just from the other fighter across the octagon or the ring or whatever sport we're talking about, is to protect the fighter from themselves. So now that we've talked about the job of the corner, let's talk about the job of the ref. This is referring to more recent news that happened this weekend. And we have a ref that, in my mind, has most of the time done a damn good job, but evidently refs are, in case you weren't aware, human. I'm going to cite Big John McCarthy a couple times in this section, but one thing that he said is that even the best refs aren't perfect, and so that's fine. But this is ridiculous. So let's go over what happened, and then we'll talk about the job of the ref. Ion Cutelaba versus Magomed Ankalaev was pictured by many pros to be fight of the night this past weekend. Ion always goes out there not just to win, but to entertain. And that's something that he said himself. When they announced his name, he walked right across the cage and got right in Ankalaev's face, to the point that security had to pull him off. And a quick side note, both the job of security and the job of the ref is supposed to be stopping that from happening.
Why are you watching and standing there like a fan and allowing this fighter to walk over? You can start to walk with him. If he stops halfway, hey, you can just stop with him, no problem. But as soon as he crosses that midway point, your hands go, you start to pull him back. Hey, don't even think about it. And you move him back. If you're the referee, you've got to be paying attention when both fighters are in the cage. That cage is your responsibility.
I mean, it is so fitting for the way that this ended, that this is the way this started, because everyone just completely shirked their own responsibilities from the start. Once a fighter gets to the center of the octagon, again, both security and the ref has got to be much more on their toes, but I digress. So Magomed Ankalaev is a Dagestani fighter, and whenever someone goes against someone from Dagestan, you know you're in for a hard-ass fight. They're just a different kind of fighter, and I'm actually going to talk about that in another video, so I'm not going to get too deep on that. But with that being said, this was shaping up to be an epically amazing fight in the light heavyweight division. Fight of the night contender, easily. 24 seconds in, Cutelaba gets hit. He starts wobbling. But there is a moment or two between the hit and the wobble, and we'll get back to that in a second. Kevin McDonald immediately runs over, starts looking like he wants to hop in, stop the fight, and this is already a bad sign. Again, citing John McCarthy, even he was saying, don't do it, Kevin. Don't do it. A ref should be calm in there. If you look at the best, Jason Herzog, Herb Dean, John McCarthy himself, even Dan Mergliata, who I would say is A-, B+ tier. He's not the best of the best, but he's just right there. But I digress again. And so when a fighter gets wobbly, yeah, a ref should be ready to stop the fight if need be. But when a fighter gets quote unquote wobbly, it can be, but not always, be a sign of a fighter being hurt. Ankalaev comes in to try to finish the fight, of course, but Cutelaba is throwing back. He's defending himself. And so let's cut to the chase. The ref has a couple jobs, like making sure the fight is clean, and if a fighter breaks the rules, he can call a timeout, take a point, maybe give a verbal warning. If there's something like a clash of heads, a groin strike, again, calling that timeout and giving the affected fighter 5 minutes to recover. If it's a clash of heads, both fighters really need that 5 minutes to recover. But the number one job of the ref is to protect the fighters. Okay, with that being said, what if a fighter knows that his or her opponent isn't going to get into a brawl, that they're a very technical fighter? And what if that fighter wants to play possum? What if that fighter wants to pretend that they're hurt to draw their opponent into more of a brawl, get them to be over aggressive and drop their defense? This is why I mentioned the moment or two between the hit and the wobble, because when someone gets stunned, their reaction is immediate because it's involuntary. And with the way Cutelaba was throwing back, a ref really isn't supposed to call a TKO unless the fighter isn't intelligently defending themselves, which Cutelaba was. The shots that Ankalaev was throwing after the quote-unquote wobble, most of them were being blocked. And even the ones that were partially blocked but slipping through a little bit, they weren't doing a lot of damage, if any at all. 10 seconds later, literally as Michael Bisping is saying he's out on his feet, which, spoiler alert, was wrong, Kevin McDonald steps in and calls the fight, with Cutelaba immediately protesting, obviously showing that he was 100% okay, lucid, that he was indeed playing possum. Part of the ref's job, as stated by Anthony Smith, who is a professional fighter currently active in the UFC light heavyweight division, as well as an analyst, said it's not just the ref's job to look at the fighters' reactions, but if the strikes that are being thrown are landing, which again, most of them were not. And an even better person who weighed in on this, like I said earlier, was the ref of all refs, Big John McCarthy, the best in the game to ever do it. The only person second to him, in my opinion, is Herb Dean, who is currently the number one best ref who's active in combat sports. Big John said...
Okay, so I want to ask you a question. You're a fighter, okay? Yeah. You have been in there and you have seen guys that are hurt.
Yep.
And then you've seen guys acting like they're hurt. What tells you the difference? What is it that tells you the difference? Come on, there's things.
Their legs.
Because if you're smart, absolutely.
Yeah, their legs.
It's your base.
Yeah.
So if you are the referee and you see this guy starting to do this thing, I don't look at this.
Yeah.
I look to see how is his base, because that's going to tell me. So instead of doing this where I go to what we call the micro, I start to look at his face.
Mm-hmm.
I step back and I look at the macro. I look at the entire package and I look at the base of the fighter. That tells me everything.
Yeah.
It tells me, look at how solid his base is. He's not hurt.
And I want to really put this in perspective, because the fight happened in Norfolk, Virginia. It happened in the USA. Cutelaba had to fly all the way from Moldova, which, spoiler alert, isn't exactly a short flight. And even more importantly than getting an L on his record, because that's not the biggest deal in the world, there are plenty of fighters that are much better than their record suggests. But what happens in the UFC? I'm not 100% educated on how this works in other combat sports, but I assume it's similar. But in the UFC, you get your base pay, which is half of your paycheck. And then if you win, you get the second half of your paycheck, which means that Kevin McDonald's call costs Cutelaba the second half of his paycheck. And that's really where this comes in. It's not just about winning or losing. This is a job for these fighters. This is their livelihood. This is how they put bread on the table. And this is one of the very, very, very worst cases of an early stoppage I have ever seen. After the fight, many people were saying they should run it back. And I believe that that is true. And that Cutelaba should get the second half of his paycheck. I really hope Dana White does good by Cutelaba, because this was just disgraceful. And I can't imagine Dana was watching this and wasn't anything less than furious and disgusted by this call. Not only that, but Cutelaba's team should protest and appeal the decision, even though most decisions don't get overturned, because the athletic commissions are much more worried about protecting their employees than the fighters that are out there putting their health and their paychecks on the line. But that's also another topic for another video. This should be ruled as a no contest, and they should run it back, because the fans were also robbed of what could have been an incredible fight. The only way that the decision is going to be overturned, also stated by John McCarthy, is if Kevin McDonald himself comes out to the athletic commission and says, I fucked up. Because again, they're going to stand by their man, which is also fucked up. Loyalty is one thing, but loyalty should never justify making the wrong decision, the wrong call, or not doing right by someone who, I mean, let's keep it real. The athletic commissions work for the state, and the state is making money on these fights. And these fights only happen if the fighters come there. Like the Texas Athletic Commission with their terrible judge during the John Jones fight and that whole card in general, the commissions are screwing their own state out of potential future matches, or at least big matches. Oh, and one more thing. Let's also take into account that Cutelaba's game plan of playing possum has now been exposed and might not work the second time. Kevin McDonald literally ruined his game plan, his paycheck, and made his entire trip all the way across the goddamn world a complete waste of time. And the sad part is that there will most likely be no repercussions, because both referees and judges as well are more or less never held accountable for their actions. And the few times that something has been done is when judges have made such terrible calls that they've been banned from reffing in the UFC. And that's only after multiple incidences. And as far as I'm aware, based on my research, before those judges got banned, the other terrible calls that they made had no repercussions for those bad calls. They were not held accountable. Something needs to change. Everyone knows it. And unfortunately, very little, if nothing, will probably be done about the Cutelaba fight or the issue as a whole. Whew. So now that all of that is off my chest, I believe, and it seems, that most of the experts would believe that more corners should be throwing their towels in fights when necessary, and that repercussions should be had for refs and judges. Again, this video wasn't about judges, but I'm just bringing that up. Whether or not you agree or you disagree, I'd love to get your opinion down in the comment section below. If you don't want to miss out on these videos or any of my other series here on YouTube, hit that ding dong down below, and shout out to the Weighing In podcast with retired referee Big John McCarthy and Josh Thompson for those little snippets that really added to this. Please go check them out. Weighing In podcast on YouTube. They have awesome content that's not only entertaining, but I've already learned so much from the few episodes of theirs that I've watched, and we can all become more educated fans by watching their content. Thank you as always for supporting the Untitled Fightcast. It means the absolute world to me. This podcast forces me to learn and become a more educated fan of MMA and combat sports in general, and I look forward to the future of this program and our community. Until next time, this has been the Untitled Fightcast, and thank you for watching.